second live Socialist Bake Along. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be on for a little bit to give people time to sort of filter through and join. And I know a couple of people last week had a little bit of trouble finding the link. So I'm just, going to be nattering on for a little bit. So today we are going to be making my favourite cookies in the whole world, white chocolate and cranberry, but we have an amazing twist this time in that they are vegan. They're vegan friendly. Last week I got a few questions from people asking how would you veganify the recipe. And so today I thought, well, let's try a vegan recipe. And these are my favourite cookies. And biscuits in general are relatively easy to make vegan. So I have a very special guest today. This is Comrade Rivet, who I'm sure some of you will know. This is my frog. He's almost as old as I am. Had him since I was 18 months old. He's a very good comrade. He's also a very good baker. So he's just going to be perched on there for on my mixer for a little bit, whilst I natter on at you, and he's going to be helping us bake some cookies today. So, whilst I give people a little bit of time to sort of filter in, I'm just going to go through the ingredients for today. So what we have, see if you can see this, we have 200 grams of self-raising flour. If you haven't been able to get your hands on some self-raising flour and you only have plain flour, that's not a problem. The cookie just won't be quite as light. If you would like a lighter cookie, then what you always do is you can always add half a teaspoon of baking powder. So we've got 200 grams of self-raising flour. We have 125 grams of caster sugar. Caster sugar is a good sugar to use for this cookie. If you want a slightly softer cookie, then you can use light brown sugar. That works really well. Dark brown sugar is probably going to be a little bit too soft. So caster sugar or light brown sugar are best for cookies, but it all depends on the kind of texture that you want. We've also got 125 grams of dairy-free spread. We do have some baking powder, a teaspoon of baking powder. Again, if you don't have baking powder, it's not a problem. Again, your cookie just won't be quite as light. As well as baking powder, you could substitute it in with bicarbonate of soda, like for like, depending on what you can get your hands on at the supermarket. We also have the main event. We have our dairy-free white chocolate chips, and we have our cranberries. Now, I'm using cranberries and white chocolate chips because they're my favourite flavour combination, but this is a basic cookie recipe, so you can really substitute in anything. You can use dark chocolate, milk chocolate, you can use any kind of dried fruit, you could use raisins, sultanas, currants, apricots, any kind of dried fruit. You could also include nuts or oats, anything. It's a basic cookie recipe, so the world is your oyster, as long as it's vegan. If you are so inclined. If you can't get your hands on vegan ingredients, or you're not a vegan, then it's really easy to just substitute in, use a normal butter, that's not the right word, use dairy butter or dairy chocolate chips. Because this is a vegan recipe, we don't have any eggs to bind our recipe together, so you might need a little bit of liquid. You can use water, or you can use milk, dairy-free milk. Any kind of dairy-free milk will work. The thickness of different dairy milks are different, so soy milk I know is a little bit thicker than something like oat milk. But it really doesn't matter. You just need to add however much milk that you think you need until it binds together. You may not need some milk, it all depends. Recipes come out differently every time. Okay, so that's our basics. Has Comrade Ribbit subscribed yet? Comrade Ribbit has subscribed to Socialist Appeal paper. You should all subscribe to Socialist Appeal newspaper. All the Marxist analysis of current events that you could ever want. He hasn't started paying subs yet because I don't know why. I need to talk to him about paying his subs and joining us. But yeah, I'm working on it. Don't worry. Maybe after today he'll join the organisation properly. Okay, so I feel like I've rabbited on for about 5 minutes now. So disclaimers now. I'm not a professional baker. I have no formal training or anything. I'm just a Marxist who loves baking. Secondly, make sure you've washed your hands. If your hair sort of goes past your chin, make sure that you tie it back. You don't want hair in our food. Also, make sure that you wipe down any surface that you're going to be using with some antibacterial spray. Okay, so without further ado, this is the live Socialist Bake-Along so that we can spread some joy and hopefully raise some money for Socialist Appeal so that we can build the forces of Marxism, end this rotten capitalist system and achieve socialism in our lifetime. So thank you to everyone who has joined and thank you to everyone who has donated. If you would like to donate, then there is a link in the event description to my PayPal. You can send some money, however much you would like, however much or however little that you can donate is really much appreciated. Thank you so much. But yeah, let's get into the baking and enjoy the stream. So we are going to start by preheating the oven to 180 degrees centigrade. If you have a fan oven, that's about 160 degrees. I do have a fan oven. It's quite temperamental, so I'm going to preheat mine to 100. What I'm going to do next, because I forgot last week, is I'm going to line my baking trays. Now, you'll be pleased to know that unlike when we were lining the cake tin last week, there is no butter or dairy-free butter needed. All you need is your baking tray, some grease-proof baking paper, parchment paper, and some scissors. All you need to do is just cut off, oopsie daisy, how you can tell it's live and unscripted. You just want to cut off some baking paper, and it's always best to get this over and done with first, otherwise, like I did last week, you could forget and you end up having to move all this stuff out of the way to try and get to your baking paper, your cake tins, so that you can line them. So there's one, just very simple, you just pop it on, and I'm just going to move this out of the way. If you only have one baking tray, that's fine, you may just need to do a couple of rounds of baking in the oven. I've got 2 baking trays, so making cookies is so easy. It's one of the easiest recipes to do, but that doesn't mean it's any less fun or any less satisfying to eat. So, again, just like this, I'm just going to move this out of the way as well. So, that is our baking trays lined. Our oven is preheated. Oh, is there a problem with the audio? If there is a problem with the audio, please let me know. Rahul says there's a problem with the audio. Harvey says not for me. Can other people let me know if there is a problem with the audio or if they're able to hear? just see how this is going. I'm technologically illiterate, so if it is my fault that the audio has gone, I may not be able to fix it. We'll just have to see how we go. So okay. Hopefully, okay. I think the problem is sorted now. Okay. So now that we've preheated our oven, we've lined our baking trays, let's get into the actual baking. So, gonna move camaraderie a bit for a bit. I'm gonna adjust the my laptop, so that you can see my workstation. So, like last week, I'm using a stand mixer because of my hands. I find it difficult to mix stuff by hand. With cookies, most recipes will say that it's actually better if you can mix by hand, just using a wooden spoon. I'm going to be doing the more difficult bits with my stand mixer, just to help my hands, and then I will be mixing the rest in by hand. So what we're going to do is, just like when we were making the cake, we're going to cream our butter, our dairy-free spread, and our sugar. So it's 125 grams of each. So just going to add those in. You'll see that I've got a different attachment on my, oh, well done, Eleanor. You'll see that I've got a different attachment on my whisk on my mixer to last time. Come on, you stupid thing. You'll see that I've got a different mixer attachment. There we go, that's better. I've got a beater this time rather than a whisk, because we don't need to mix things quite so vigorously. As I said, most recipes for cookies or biscuits will say you want to do the mixing by hand, so it's more gentle. So I'm just going to put this on a low setting to mix the butter and sugar together. Every so often, I'm going to get my wooden spoon. I'm just going to stir around the sides so we make sure that all the ingredients are getting nicely combined. Just on a low setting, making sure that our butter and our sugar are nicely combined. Thank you, Mia. I love this dress as well. I stole it from my mother. Okay, so our butter and our sugar has creamed together really nicely. So I'm just gonna give it a little stir, make sure that there's no sugar at the bottom or caught around the sides. No. So just gonna, oopsie daisy, that looks like it's gonna go. Okay, we want all our ingredients inside of our mixing bowl. We don't want them on the mixer. So hopefully you can see that's all nicely creamed and blended together. So now what we are going to do is we're going to take our flour, just move the chocolate chips. We're going to take our flour and we're going to take our baking powder and just going to add about a teaspoon's worth. And then we're just going to mix the flour and the baking powder. If you would like extra chocolatey cookies, what you can do is you can take out 20 grams of the flour, so have 180 grams of flour rather than 200, and you can add 20 grams of cocoa powder if you want some really chocolatey cookies. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to wipe my wooden spoon clean. There we go. And I'm just going to add my flour little by little to the mixer. And again, I'm going to mix it on a low speed so that it combines nice and smooth. Oops, not this again. Me doing it the wrong way around. Again, just keep stirring around the edges to make sure that everything gets in. Like I say, we want all our mixture combined. And I'm just going to add a little bit more flour. Mix that together. Any advice on beating it without a machine? Yes, so wooden spoons are best for beating stuff without a machine, and it's just going to take a little bit of elbow grease. So when you're beating or creaming the butter and the sugar, sometimes what I find can help the sugar sort of bind with the butter, I suppose, get properly mixed in with the butter, is to sort of press against the sides of the mixing bowl, almost like forcing that sugar into the butter. But it's just a case of using a bit of elbow grease and just being persistent. Really, it will take a little bit of extra. It will take a bit of extra time, and it will take a bit of extra effort, but the results will be no different. And in fact, when you're baking cookies, it's probably best to mix by hand. I'm just using the machine because it's easier on my somewhat problematic hands. Right, that's nice and combined, so we're just going to add the next bit of our flour. When lockdown is over, I will certainly make you some cookies, Mia. I promise. Now, don't worry if you're finding that you're ending up with a very dry mixture that's struggling to come together. That's okay. That's why we've got the water or the milk to help bind it together, because as I say, this is a vegan recipe, so we don't have any eggs to help with the binding process. And I'm just going to add the last flour. And that's kind of gone everywhere. There was more flour left in that bowl than I thought, but oh well. Worry not. So just going to keep mixing until that's nicely combined. I'm going to do the last bit by hand because this mixture is so dry and it is struggling to come together. So I'm going to do the last bit by hand. Just make sure that I've got as much mixture off the beater as possible, because we don't want to waste all that nice cookie dough, do we? And some has gone in another bowl. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to do the, sorry, ribbit. So I'm just going to do the last bit by hand, just to make sure that I'm really getting in there, making sure that all the flour is combined with the rest of the mixture. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some milk, a tablespoon at a time. If you don't have a tablespoon or a kind of measuring thing, a tablespoon is roughly 3 teaspoons. I'm just going to add some milk, a tablespoon at a time. If you don't want quite so rich a mixture, you can use water. That's starting to come together now. So, add another tablespoon of milk. And now that everything is starting to come together, still need a bit more milk, but at this stage I'm going to start adding my cranberries and my chocolate chips. Now remember, you don't have to use cranberries, you can use any kind of dried fruit, you can use any kind of chocolate, you don't have to use chocolate, you can just have fruit, you could have nuts, you could have oats. The possibilities are really endless. So the amount of cranberries and chocolate chips that you put in is really up to you. Some people like them a bit more chocolatey. I know some people who want their cookies more chocolate than cookie. I particularly like a lot of cranberries in my cookies. I like something really nice and fruity. So you can see it's starting to come together. Different doughs might have different consistencies, so don't worry if you're finding that you're needing a little bit more milk for everything to come together. If you've added too much milk or too much water and you're finding that you're having the opposite problem, your dough is too wet, you can always add more self-raising flour. But it's best to err on the side of caution and add your liquid little by little, because it's much easier to add a little bit more liquid than it is to take it away, I suppose. So now I'm going to add my milk by the teaspoon, just because I really don't want to end up with too wet a dough. It's difficult to handle. few more chocolate chips. A few more cranberries as well, because I love cranberries. Probably my favourite dried fruit. When I was in my first year of university, my local supermarket used to sell bags of dried cranberries as part of their meal deals. So sometimes if I had just got paid or something, wanted to treat myself, or yeah, cranberries. So a good way to tell if your dough is fully combined is to get in there with your hands and see if it's coming together and holding its shape nicely, if it will go into a ball and it will stay in that kind of shape. So as you can see, I've got a nice ball of dough that is staying together. I'm just running my hands round the insides of the bowl, looking for any loose dough and just sticking it. And there we are. There we have our ball of cookie dough. So what I'm going to do now is, because I'm working on a very small table, is I'm just going to have a little quick clear up and get rid of this cookie dough on my hands. Feel free to do the same. It's always best to be sort of cleaning up your workstation as you go along, because otherwise it can get very overwhelming if you're just constantly like rummaging around between all these different bowls, empty bowls, dirty bowls. You can get a little bit overwhelming. Last week when I was doing my cake, I was saying that my mother always likes tidy desk, tidy mind. And it is no different to when we are baking. So, get that down, my milk. Remember, if you do have leftover milk, you can pour it straight back into the bottle, or keep it out to add to your tea or coffee or anything. And same with leftover cranberries, they make an excellent snack. And I've got some chocolate chips. I'll save those for gluten-free brownies. I've been promising I'll make my sister, but I haven't quite got around to it yet. Okay, so now I've cleared a little bit of space on my workstation. Ribbit, you can go back to your former position. He's watching over everything. I'm going to bring back one of my baking trays. Well, I can bring back both, but I don't have enough room on the table for both. Now, there's a few different ways that you can make your cookies. So the size, first of all, is entirely up to you. It depends whether you want those like massive cookies that you can like buy in the supermarket, or whether you want like the small ones. I just keep forgetting where my camera lens is. Or the small ones that you can get in the packets. It's entirely up to you, depending how big you want your cookies. Now, what you can do if you want is you can dust some flour on your workstation and roll out the dough using a rolling pin, and then get a cookie cutter, or if you don't have a cookie cutter, you can use the rim of a glass to cut out a shape. And with some biscuits, like gingerbread, you have to do this. With cookies, because they spread out quite a bit, what you can do is you can just break a little bit of the dough off, you can roll it into a ball, pop it onto your baking tray. I don't know if you can see that, I might tip that down a little bit more. put it onto your baking tray and just take the palm of your hand and just squeeze it down a little bit. So we've got something in like a roughly circular shape. So I'm not doing mine too big. Remember that these will spread out a little bit in the oven. So make sure that you are leaving at least a 1 inch circumference. 1 inch is about 2.5 centimeters, or like roughly from this joint of your thumb up to the tip. So leave about 1 inch circumference. And again, with the thickness of your cookies, if you're rolling them out or just squeezing them down like this, the thickness can be they can be as thick or as thin as you want. Just remember that they will spread out a little bit. So I'm just going to break off little balls of my dough, roll them into a roughly spherical shape, and just press down. If you want to sort of improve the sort of like, if you want to make them a little bit more circular, you can just get a thumb and a finger and sort of rough them out a little bit. I'm probably only going to get about 6 on this baking tray, so even with my 2 baking trays I'm probably going to need to do a couple of relays of baking, I suppose, but we'll see how we go. And there we go. It's another cookie. This isn't Bake Off, so if they're not identical, don't worry about it. If you think, so this one is a little bit small, just going to get a little bit more dough and just reshape it. Again, remember that these will spread out in the oven. If they do sort of fuse into each other, you can always cut them out, but I find that's a little bit of a pain, and since I'm not rushed for time, I can do a couple of batches. Batches, that's the word I was looking for. So 5, and that's a little bit too big. So there's my 6. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but there's my 6 cookies on the baking tray. So I'm going to pop those into the oven on the middle shelf for about 12 sorry, I'm going to have to check. I've totally forgotten. Give me a second. So I'm just popping them into the oven that I've already preheated. And yeah, sorry, 12 minutes. I had a crisis of confidence. I'm going to pop them in for 12 minutes or until golden brown. Now my oven isn't very see-through, so I'm sort of going to open the oven to check at 10 and 12 minutes to see how they're doing, because they might take a little bit less time, they might take a little bit more time. So I'm going to set my timer for 12 minutes, but I'm going to keep looking at my timer and check on them in 10 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to get my other baking tray. And I am going to roll out my next batch. Batch, it's a nice word, isn't it? The next batch of cookies. That's a little bit big, but oh well. It's a big one. That's okay. As I say, this isn't Bake Off. I'm not going to be... No one's going to be judging. I hope no one's going to be judging me if they're not all identical in size, and I'm certainly not going to be judging you either. My family should like them anyway. So was a chocolate chip that fell to the bottom of the bowl. I should have said, when you're mixing your dough, make sure that your cranberries, chocolate, whatever you've got inside your cookies, make sure it's pretty evenly spread out. You don't want one cookie that's like 90% cranberry and another that is just entirely dough. You want to make sure that you have some kind of even spread, just so they will taste similar. Yeah, some of these are a little bit irregular in size, but that's okay. Rustic home baking, that's my style. I don't make stuff look pretty, but it sure as hell tastes pretty good. Probably wants a little bit more dough. Okay. This is quite a cranberry one. No. I'm not going to put these in the oven just yet. But if you want to, you can. You can put them on a different shelf. I like to have everything in the middle of my oven. Just because my oven is a little bit dodgy. So I'm going to put these to one side for now. Again, left about an inch circumference so that they've got room to spread. I'm going to wash my hands, get the dough off. There. Reposition my camera. Okay. So the cookies are in the oven. Oh, excuse me. I've been talking for too long. So, I'm going to check on those in about 6 minutes. But for now, I think I'm... Josh, what's happened? Josh, what's happened to your cookies? Maybe I can help. Let's see. Feel free to ask any questions about baking, politics, anything. Ask me what I have for breakfast. My scales are playing up after washing them. I just dropped my measuring cup into the mixer. Please turn it to full instead of. Oh no! Oh no! That if you don't have scales, you kind of estimate. I know baking is supposed to be super precise. Apparently, cooking is an art and baking is a science, which I suppose is kind of true, especially with vegan baking. Since last week, since my appalling answer to Olivia's question about vegan baking, I've been doing a lot of research into vegan ingredients, and you sort of really have to understand how food works and why it works. So, for example, knowing that the proteins in aquafaba, which is the liquid in a can of chickpeas or beans, that liquid that you drain, that's called aquafaba. The proteins in that aquafaba work identically to the proteins in egg whites. So you can whip up aquafaba just in the same way that you can egg whites. So it's actually really interesting. I've always joked for about 10 years that I am a humanities kid through and through. Nothing will ever make me like science, but I think I found the one thing that will make me like science. Food science, it's cool. So yeah, that was a bit of a tangent, but yeah, baking doesn't have to be like super precise. When I was in my first year at university, we didn't have a proper oven, so I didn't really do much baking, but the one thing that you could make in our mock oven was cookies. I didn't have any scales because I didn't think I'd be doing any baking because I didn't have a proper oven, so I sort of guesstimated, and it worked out pretty well. So you can sort of estimate, and it won't be the end of the world. If you really have sort of the patience. A teaspoon of flour is about 2.5 grams, but that might take a while. So, Josh, did you add the vanilla already? I didn't add vanilla to my mixture. You can add vanilla if you want. I was going to add vanilla, but when I checked the vanilla, it went out of date in October, so not ideal. You can add like a drop or so of vanilla when you're mixing after you've mixed the sugar and the butter together. But if you don't have vanilla, then it's fine. You'll just have to add more chocolate or more cranberries to make up for the flavour. So that's not too bad in my opinion. What's the weight volumes of the chocolate and fruit? The weight volumes of the chocolate and fruit, it doesn't matter. I just poured out some chocolate chips based on how many I thought I might need. I do have some left over, but I just gradually added them to my mixture and used my eye really to see, do I think that's enough? How much do I want? So it's really entirely up to you. I reckon, how much is in this bag? I reckon I used just under 50 grams of chocolate, and let me get the cranberries. Yeah. I reckon I used about 50 grams of chocolate and about 75 grams of cranberries, if you want my measurements, but you could reverse that. You could have 50 grams of cranberries and 75 grams of chocolate. You could have 100 grams of chocolate. It entirely depends on your personal taste, how much you want in there. So it's not an exact science. You kind of have to play around with it, see how much you want. But I would always advise adding it gradually because it's much easier to add more than it is to take away. So I hope that answers your question. If the dough is too sticky, add some flour. Add some more flour if the dough is too sticky. Cookie dough is unlike other biscuit dough, so if it is a little bit sticky, it's not a problem because you don't have to like roll it out on a rolling pin. But if it is really sticky, then you can just add a bit more flour to dry it out. I pronounce a batch of cookies nice. Josh, all good I think. Nice. Good to hear we've rescued the cookies. We made double and I'm trying not to start munching raw cookie dough. Now, you can have vegan cookie dough raw. You're not going to get salmonella because there's no egg in it. So another good thing about vegan baking, you can't get food poisoning as easily. Although I don't recommend eating raw flour. You shouldn't eat raw flour, but a little bit's not going to hurt. I did convert. It's all there, thankfully. Good. Done 150 grams of cranberry cherry berry mix, 100 grams of orange dark chocolate. Oh, that sounds really nice. The good thing about this recipe is it is a basic cookie dough. 200 grams of flour, 125 grams of sugar and butter each, a little bit of baking powder. It's a basic cookie dough, so you can really customise it however you want. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to have a look at my cookies, see how they're doing. Oh, they look lovely. They're not quite golden brown, so I'm going to leave them in for another 2 minutes. Check on them again after 12 minutes. So they're not quite golden brown, but they have risen nicely. They've risen a little bit because of the baking powder and the self-raising flour, and they have spread out. They aren't spreading into each other, which is good. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you leave some space between your balls of dough. So yeah, keep the questions coming in. And do you need a taste consultant? I've made this recipe enough times to know that they taste amazing. So I don't need a taste consultant, but you are more than welcome to be your own taste consultant and make them as well. So keep your questions coming in, whether it's about vegan baking, baking recipes. If you have any suggestions of other things that you would like me to bake, I have been trying for weeks now to get hold of some bread flour because I know a few people requested some bread, something more savoury. I haven't been able to get some. I do definitely want to make some kind of bread for you at some point, but I'm not going to commit to making bread until I know that I have 100% got some bread flour. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks I will be able to get some bread flour. So that's just like a warning, like a notice, I suppose, a reminder. I will be making bread at some point. If you would like to make bread with me, you might want to start looking for bread flour because it is impossible to get bread flour anywhere. I haven't been able to get some. So I want to make bread at some point with you. So be on the lookout for bread flour for the next couple of weeks when I am finally able to get some bread flour. Okay. Okay, so it's been 12 minutes. So I'm going to have another look at my cookies. Okay, the cookies are sort of a pale golden colour. So I'm going to leave them in. I'm going to leave them in for another 2 minutes until they're a little bit more golden. But I could take them out now. They're sort of a pale golden colour, but I like my cookies a little bit more well done. So I'm going to leave them in for a few minutes. Okay. What made you join Socialist Appeal? Thank you, Rahul. That's a great question. I joined Socialist Appeal about 18 months ago because before I went to university and discovered the UA Marxist Society, I was feeling quite lost politically. I was just I was very angry and very disillusioned. I don't think I would have described myself. I definitely would have described myself as a socialist. Don't know if I'd have described myself as a Marxist when I was 18. I was certainly on that journey. But I was feeling very lost. I sort of felt just like this one sad, angry person, just so annoyed at the way that the world was going. And I knew that I hated capitalism and that capitalism was the cause of a lot of our problems. But I didn't really have like a direction for myself. I sort of thought, oh yeah, when the revolution happens, I'd like take part. I didn't sort of have a kind of direction for myself. But when I sort of when I went to university and found the UA Marxist Society and the amazing comrades there, I started like reading theory and things. It's sort of, theory is a guide to action, right? So I sort of saw a direction for myself, and as I sort of learnt more, did more stuff, I realised like, yeah, we need to like, it's important to like build the forces of Marxism. It's not enough to just like be like, yeah, capitalism sucks, and I suppose eventually when it happens I'll like help overthrow it. Like, no, I need to start that fight now. I need to be doing that stuff now. Oh, that's the timer. Yeah, I need to be joining that fight now. And so yeah, I was sort of I went along to the Marxist Society more, got more involved, spoke to the amazing comrades there, and they invited me along to a branch meeting and were like, do you want to join? This is what it entails. And I said yes, and it's like the best decision I ever made. Oh, lovely. So, I'm just going to get the next batch of cookies and pop them in. So yeah, if you're angry at the state of the world, but you're feeling a little bit maybe lost politically, you don't know really like what you can do as an individual, then have a look at our website, www.socialist.net, have a look at our articles, and if you agree with what we have to say, then consider subscribing to the paper, getting in touch with your local Marxist society or your local Socialist Appeal branch, taking part in reading groups. I really cannot recommend enough. Theory is our guide to action as Marxists. then yeah, consider joining us, helping us to build the forces of Marxism, and also donating to my bake along so that we can build the forces of Marxism. So I hope that is a decent answer to your question. So I've just taken the cookies out of the oven and I'm going to try this. I don't want them to just collapse on the table when I try this. But you can see, hopefully, that they're sort of a nice golden brown colour. If you wanted to, you could leave them in for another few minutes if you wanted. But I like my cookies like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, set a timer for those cookies that I've just put in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave them on the baking tray for a few minutes, because when cookies have just come out of the oven, they're really soft. So that's why it's best to judge when your cookies are done, not by like touching them like you would maybe a cake or bread. It's best to go by colour. So yeah, if you wanted to, I could have left them in for another couple of minutes. It depends how soft or crunchy you want your cookies. So I've left mine sort of like a medium-ish sort of golden brown. So I'm just going to leave them to cool for now. My next cookies are in the oven. I've got the rest of my dough here for rolling out my next lot of cookies. I reckon I've probably got, I don't know, I'm really bad at judging these things. I'd say I've got another maybe 8 to 12, maybe 10-ish cookies left. I've got enough dough for about 10 more cookies. But again, that all depends on how big you how big your dough was, how big you want your cookies. So I've got mine a decent size. They're not massive, but they're not tiny. They are the Goldilocks size for me. Oh, my throat gets so dry from just talking so much. Happy Shopper do oat cranberry cookies that are vegan and I love them. I often have them for breakfast, so I'm really looking forward to eating these hot as today's breakfast. That is such a good idea. Oh my god, cookies for breakfast. Yes. Especially, I mean, you can have, chocolate cookies for breakfast, but you could do, like oat and cranberry is an amazing flavour combination, or like nutty sort of cookies you can have for breakfast. Or, there's nothing wrong with having chocolate chip cookies for breakfast. I'm not going to judge, because I have done that in the past. Sorry, my throat is so dry. As dry as that dough was before I added the milk. So these are cookies that you can really make into your own. They can be a little snack, they can be a dessert, they can be breakfast. They can really be anything you want them to be. I've made 12. Cookies for breakfast are totally acceptable. I agree, Daisy. Cookies for breakfast are 100% acceptable, and I think that, why not? Why not? Why not have cookies for breakfast? So, what do you think, Comrade Ribbit? Do you like the idea of cookies for breakfast? It's got the seal of approval from Comrade Ribbit, which means that it must be okay. There was something else I was going to say. I can't remember what. If you have any suggestions of other things that you would like me to bake, I kind of want to do something savoury next week. I'm thinking scones, but maybe sort of elevate them a little bit. I'm thinking savoury scones, something where I don't need bread flour because I haven't got bread flour yet. It's like cereal adjacent. Yes, it's a good point. Cereal adjacent cookies. I know what I was going to say. If you want, I'm not a huge fan of nuts. I don't really like nuts unless they're sort of like an accompaniment to something. So like, I don't know, if they're like in a pie for some texture, or they're a garnish on some carrot cake or something. I don't mind that, but I don't really like nuts in cookies or anything. But what you could do is you can use nut butter, and you can, instead of like a non-dairy spread or a dairy butter, you can substitute them for equal amounts. So I used 125 grams of dairy-free spread. You could use 125 grams of cashew, almond, peanut, whatever butter you like, if you want that sort of really nutty texture. No, really nutty taste, sorry. So yeah, peanut butter or nut butter is a staple in vegan baking. I quite like using cashew butter because for me it tastes the least nutty. So I'm sort of working on a recipe for a vegan cheese cake that involves cashew butter. So watch this space. Eventually I might have got it right and can share that recipe with you. Okay, so I'm gonna get a plate now because I think these should have cooled enough for me to be able to handle them. So I'm just gonna move my bowl. It really is a small table I'm working with. And that's fine, you know, you can do baking however much or little space you've got. So I'm just gonna peel these away. Yeah, they're still a little bit soft, but they're enough for me to handle. The lighting in here is not great, so they look a lot paler. They probably look a lot paler than they actually are. Maybe you can see it better on the bottom, but they're pale, like a sort of like medium golden colour. There we go. Oh, this one's not perfectly circular. That can go at the bottom of the pie. But as I say, this isn't Bake Off. I'm not Paul Hollywood, so does it really matter? No, because they're still going to taste amazing. Okay, so just move those tissues. So that's our first lot of cookies. We've got another lot in the oven now, but that's essentially it. That's it. That's my new and improved vegan white chocolate and cranberry cookies. They taste amazing. I'm gonna use the slightly misshapen one, sort of still warm and still a little bit soft. But there, you can see there's some chocolate in there and there's some cranberries. A little bit of a crunch around the edges. And they taste amazing. That's it really. I don't really have anything else to say. So I hope that you've enjoyed this bake along. If you are baking, I hope that your cookies are going well. Please feel free to share pictures of your finished product. Thank you to everyone who has already donated to Socialist Appeal, to my fundraiser. Please consider doing so if you haven't already. Every penny goes towards building the force of Marxism so that we can achieve socialism in our lifetime. And leave any suggestions of things that you would like me to bake. Ideally savoury. I feel like I've done 2 sweet things in a row. I want to mix it up a little bit. Just as long as it doesn't contain bread flour, because I haven't been able to get some, but I will eventually. I promise. I'll get some bread flour and we are going to make some bread. I promise. I only cried once while making the cookie dough. That's amazing, Rahul. That's amazing. Honestly, I can't count the amount of times I've like broken down over baking. So that's part of the reason why I'm doing relatively simple recipes. Partly because it's easy for me to instruct, partly because it's good for people who maybe have never baked before who are watching this, and secondly so that I don't cry on camera. So thank you so much to everyone for joining this bake along. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're baking, I hope that it's going well. Thanks for donating, and please consider donating if you haven't already. Other than that, I just have to say thank you again. Stay safe, stay sane, stay happy, and remain indoors. Thank you, everyone. Love you lots. Say bye, Comrade Ribbit. Bye.